Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Trekyards. He's Commander Cockings.
He's Kevin Foley, and guest.
I'm Admiral Buck.
Admiral Buck, otherwise known as Bill Krause. He is back joining us today to talk about more of his awesome ship designs. And today, we're going to focus on the Hornet class, Wasp, also known as the Duderstad. You might know it as the Intrepid. There's a lot of different names.
Yeah, a lot of names. But the show, it's the Intrepid. It's the one in one episode and then a little bit another one that Commander Rowe comes in and then has that epic shot of going and fires some torpedoes and doesn't hit, even though it could have fired phasers and and could have chased them.
A fantastic design, one of my favorites from Picard for sure. And I also enjoyed seeing your Wasp class at Wonderfest a few years ago, or the Hornet class. So let's talk about that. When did that thing come about, and what was the inspiration for that?
I built the Wasp. The same time I built the Shangri-La model for Wonderfest back in 2015. And they were both scratch build one-offs of designs that I had been working on when I first got back in the hobby of making starships. And the Wasp was really inspired by a fan design done by Larry Miller back in 1985 or 86, what he called his Hornet class light cruiser, I think it was. And he sold these as blueprints, which you get at conventions. And they're printed blueprints, and I had these forever. And it featured this cutout hull, primary hull, which I used on the Shangri-La, and then later again on the Wasp. And it basically was a kind of a streamlined insectoid-looking kind of interceptor. It had this long tail with a weapons pod at the bottom. And on his original version, it had a little fighter craft mounted to the side that were stored inside the primary hull, but then could be mounted on the outside of the Stinger. I didn't build those, but both of those appeared at Wonderfest back in 2015, and then was later featured in a Ships of the Line calendar, my first one for Doug Drexler. It wasn't until after working on season 3 of Picard and working with Terry Metallison developing the Titan that I thought I was done with Star Trek. I was done with Picard. And I started going back to my design of the Wasp and working on a TOS version of that, because the Wasp itself was a TMP era looking ship. So I wanted to design something that was more TOS predecessor to that. So I started sketching some ideas for that and then posted it online. And then Terry saw it and goes, "Oh, I have an idea for this ship." And I'm like, oh, really? So can you make this into a Picard era looking ship? So now I'm going the other direction with the Wasp and heading it another 100 years into the future. And was working directly with Terry, I think through Instagram, back and forth, working on this new ship that he wanted for the show. I had no idea what it was going to be for, but it was kind of cool to kind of working with him. Kind of had more time actually developing that than I did the Titan. I think we spent almost 2 months on this thing, back and forth, until they discovered that we were working on it. And I go, hey, you're working on this ship with Terry. Can we have it? And like, yeah. And luckily I had been working digitally, so I had a digital model that I was able to give to him, which I then gave to Doug Drexler. And then they up-resed it and made it all out into I had been calling this thing the Chaparral. It was the Chaparral class, which is what I had named it as a TOS era. And it was called the Chaparral throughout the production. And at one point, Dave asked, "What are you calling this again?" I go, "Chaparral." "Oh, yeah, that's right." And then I see the Starfleet Bible. It's all the ships that are listed for the show, and it's listed as the Dayton class. I go, "Where'd this come from?" And that disappeared. And when it was finally shown on the show, it was now the Duderstad. I go, "How many names does this thing need?" So that was kind of fun seeing its name get changed several times.
Yeah, that lineup of the ships from TOS, like to the Intrepid from Picard, I loved seeing that, because the profile of that design really speaks to me. I really like that one, and I love your TOS version of it as well. So kudos, man. That's just awesome.
And it's such an oddity. Picard was a very, very big show, so you got a lot of eyes on the show. And this, which we'd seen from you, it's like, if we know you, as soon as one of your designs shows up, like, oh, I see where that came from, because we've known Bill for 10 years, basically.
Yeah. And spoilers, we have an episode on this in Trekyards. Go look at that.
But it is a very, very different feeling and yet very conventional feeling. So I was interested to see what the audience was going to react. If it was going to be negative, as in that's too radical, or very, wow, that's so interesting. Really positive reaction to this, to the broad audience. It is so weird, but it works together. This Picard version is a really nice ship. It's a bit odd, but that's its charm, right? I mean, what do you think of the reaction? Because I feel like I was pretty much fully positive.
Yeah, it's pretty much a polarizing design, and it had been even as the Wasp. People either liked it or they really hated it, and there was not much in between. So if you're saying more people liked it than hated it,
Yeah.
then that's great. But I kind of saw both and like, hey, that's what the ship looks like. And I liked it. That's why I built it. But I think that's why Terry picked it as the design for this ship, because it looks menacing. It looks like it's mad, and it's angry because it looks like an insect with its tail and stinger forward under its belly. And that's what I think he really wanted for the ship. It should look menacing when you first see it. It should look Federation, but it should look,
Did they work out like a mission profile for this thing? Is it a science vessel or is it like a fighter type deal?
No, there's nothing ever done in that level of background. It's like, this looks cool, we're going with it. And
well, in your
I wish
head canon, what is it?
in my head canon, yeah, I design stuff as I'm working on the model. It has to have a purpose. And the original Wasp and Hornet they were interceptors. They were meant to be high speed border patrol ships that would maintain security and safety during the commerce lanes and border patrol areas. And the fighter craft that were mounted on it would be quick response kind of interdiction, kind of like the Coast Guard, if you will. That was my headcanon for the ship at the time. But
if you had a lot more design process on this, obviously in the original version, the deflector is in the saucer and the lower stinger is torpedoes. Where in that process, because that's one of the few things about it that's distinct. So therefore, swapping those around, and what point in the process with Terry then did it go from weapon pod to deflector pod and then torpedoes in the neck? When was that shift? It's a pretty radical shift from design choice wise.
Well, when I did the TOS version of it, I had made that lower pod basically like a secondary hull, and it had a deflector dish in the front of it rather than a weapons thing. So even before it became the Duderstadt, it already had the earmarks for that being a deflector area rather than a weapons area. So when I updated it to a Picard era, a Chaparral, that became like a glowing deflector area in the front, and I also included one in the back, so I had deflectors or sensors in both directions. That's why you see a glowing area behind the pod as well as in the front. The weapons, I hadn't really indicated where they would go on the Intrepid. It was kind of very much a very basic looking concept model. It didn't have a lot of detail on it. It was basically about shape and flow and the line. So Doug had added all the weaponry. I think he probably was directed to add a lot of it to make it even look more menacing. But the whole front of the stinger was just bristling with little tiny photons. And I told Doug, I said, can you get rid of some of this? It's like this bristling with little red dots. I go, move some of these out of the way. Just, wow. But
yeah, no quantums. I'll put 12 photons, but no quantum launchers. It's like, you got a space for a quantum. The source is quite flat.
But it has actually, in the Duderstadt, it has rows and rows of escape pods all over the hull. It looks very TNG. You look at the Titan, there's none of that. So two different very design aesthetics going on there.
A lot of the more modernistic, John Eves came along, made the E, and then a lot of things took inspiration from the E. It was kind of an almost a takeover design choice wise. The flatness of your saucer, the sort of, not lack of detail, but the simplification of detail. Were you trying to keep it more in the Rick TNG vibe? Because there's almost no E in this, which I kind of like because it's its own thing. For this version, was that very much a choice, or just not think to put those extra details in?
I didn't really get to that area where I can add detail. I mean, I was giving them basically a very rough concept. So there were no windows, there were no phaser placements. It was basically just saucer, engines, general layout. And then Doug rebuilt it digitally and then started adding his own detail onto it. So once it left my desk, it was in Doug's area, and I was, out of the picture. But there wasn't a lot of time.
I was about to ask. I mean, it is simple. Do you think it was only given like 2-week build, 1-week build, so therefore they only had to go for basics?
Yeah. If that, yeah. I know it was a week for Titan, and I don't know how much time we had for the Intrepid, but it was very, very quick. I think it went straight into visual effects right away. I know Titan did because they had to get that up and running so they can do all the on-screen graphics for the sets and stuff like that. So there was not a lot of design time. We begged for another week on the Titan, but couldn't get it.
Wow. So my question is, when are you bringing the model of this to Wonderfest so you can win another Trekyards Best Star Trek?
The
trophy?
Duderstat?
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. I could have it next year. I know it's being printed right now, so it's a definite possibility.
Because for all the viewers out there, he's won the Trekyards Best Star Trek ship twice now at Wonderfest. Not that that means anything, but I'm kind of proud of it.
I'm very proud of that.
Do you think though you'd be interested in taking a second pass at Doug's version, the one that I'm looking at, the final version, and doing your additional detail up? Because there's a lot of things you like to add that add a character, and it's a semi-simple model. And there are certainly some shots in the show where you can see, oh, that was built in a weekend in the last year, I suppose, year since it's come out. Wanted to go back and do a refit, let's call it that, to not disrespect the original, to redetail it based on your own post-TNG logic, or are you kind of, that's it, I'm not going to retouch it? Because I'd love to see your second pass, as it were.
No, I like the what Doug did to the Duderstat, and especially the hull and the Stinger. It's beautiful work. I would have liked to have seen more of my designed engine on it. Overall, I think it's beautiful. I think it really came out nice. There's one detail that bugs me, and there's a round deflector dish, which sits at the top of the base of the spine, and it's in a square box. And like, why is this round thing in a square box? There's no other square boxes on the ship, but it's like if you took a round peg and put it in a square box, like, why is that? It just doesn't flow. And on my original concept, it had more of a snowbank that came as the spine came off the primary hull. It created like a little rounded snowbank, and then within that rounded bank was the deflector crystal. Where in Doug's version, it just slopes down. And there's a square hole cut into it, and then there's this raised circular cylinder. It's like, but that's a minor thing. No one sees that but me.
There is a deflector crystal, isn't there, in this, at least visually? Why is there a deflector crystal, even though that tech was abandoned, 200 years ago? Why did that come back?
It's in everything. It's in the Stargazer. There's 4 of them in a Stargazer.
The impulse crystals, yeah.
Impulse crystal, the round impulse warp governor, as he calls it. That's on the Stargazer, and it's on
warp governor, not impulse crystal.
The name got changed, but that's what it is. You go way back to the refit, and that's that blue crystal back.
Yeah.
It's like the Picard, the glowing Picard on the engines. I mean, that came back after being gone for a few years during the motion picture, where we went from Picard nacelles to linear with nothing glowing in front, back to glowing Pichards again. So yeah, technology comes and goes as designers think it. I like that.
I didn't know if you had a specific reason for it. It's quite a specific design choice. It's going back to go forward, as it were.
Now, you said you had different versions of nacelles on this originally. I would love to see what that looked like, because it looks like they basically just took the same design as the Titan nacelles to throw on it, which
a Stargazer
fleet. But yeah,
it's like we're using the same engines on the Reliant as he did the Enterprise. It kind of unifies the fleet look. But I think there's a version of it that Doug had when he first did the original concept of the Duderstat that had more of my design, which really was a placeholder. I was trying to do something very John Eves-like. And originally, I think Terry wanted those engines to be kind of canted at an angle, almost perpendicular to the angle of the pylon. And that remained through my concept till it was given to Doug. And at some point, they made them upright. But all the way through my concept work, they were at an angle. It was something I think he wanted to be more like an inquiry class, kind of, where it had these angled engines.
Yeah.
And I don't think it worked from certain angles because it was such a skinny cross section of the engine from the side. You just kind of, it didn't look right. But
I already learned a lot about this thing. But unfortunately, that's the end of the episode. Yeah, so we will be having Bill back, of course. So I'd like to thank Bill once again for joining us. I really appreciate it, and hopefully you guys do as well.
He was so kind to have the same haircut and the same jacket. Wonderful. Every video, crazy.
Please comment down below anything you'd like Bill to see or any questions you may have, and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, do all the things. So until next time, he's the awesome Admiral Buck, otherwise known as Bill Krause.
He's the lower rank, but still special Captain Foley.
And then we got Commander Goggins.
Yep.
But he makes Trekyards go, so it's fine. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.